Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to WOTS Weekly Features. Today's guest is Claudine Crangle, author of The House Next Door. We'll be chatting about Claudine's inspiration behind her book and also taking a little tour of some of the houses that she made for the book. I'm Yelly, and I'll be your host. WOTS Toronto operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Paytune First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is the subject, of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabe and Allied Nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land you live on wherever you're tuning in from. So as I mentioned, our guest today is Claudine Crangle. So we'll welcome her on now. Hi, Claudine.
Hello, Yelly.
I'm so excited to chat with you.
I'm excited to be here.
Yay. All right. To start off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? What's your little intro?
Well, my name is Claudine Crangle, and I am an author and illustrator. I have published 3 books, and The House Next Door is my first Canadian publication, so I'm pretty excited to finally break into my home market with a wonderful publisher. So yeah, this is my first book, and here we go.
Do you, are your other books children's books as well?
Yes. So my very first book was an adult nonfiction book, so dry, no pictures. And then I have done 2 children's books for an academic publisher in the US. So definitely pictures and words, but a slightly different kind of process.
Very cool. Very fun. So what was your inspiration for The House Next Door, the thing that we're talking about?
So this is the question that probably had me most nervous about doing the interview. And that is because it's very hard for me to wrap my mind around all the different places and things that came together to make this book. It's kind of, it was a very slow process, I'll start by saying. And it really was sort of the coming together of my own childhood experience, my love for making. I am definitely a crafty person. I always joke that I'm more comfortable with a knife than with a pen or a brush, and that probably says scary things about me, but I really like making, and I like making from garbage, essentially. I really like making from found objects. I love the idea of something from nothing. And I think this book came from just a whole combination of pieces coming together. I was thinking about, first of all, my love of architecture. I do love houses and architecture, and I am a person who goes for walks at night and critiques everyone's choices on window replacements, all of that stuff.
Yes.
And I had started by making some paper houses years ago out of old like cookie boxes and things, and keeping all of the packaging in place. And I started to realize the piece I really liked was cutting open the windows. And then that translated into a fascination with shutters. And here in North America, we don't really use shutters like they do in Europe to close keep the light out and keep the heat out in the summer. But I ended up making a huge cardboard apartment building in my studio, which told the story of my experience in Italy. And I started to see this idea of stories and buildings coming together. And so somehow all of that, and then I started playing with making houses because I had gotten all the cardboard out and started collecting all these things to make this building. And so that was going on, studio stuff, playing, kind of just exploring, playing for nothing to do with the children's book. And then there was also the drives. So we would be out in the country and I would see new subdivisions go in. And I had a real response to that. And I had to kind of check myself on that response because I started thinking about my own childhood. I grew up in these subdivisions. So I grew up in the 70s in Bramalea. And our family lived in 3 or 4 different subdivisions. And so we kind of were the new neighbors showing up, and we showed up en masse. And it was a very different time. So Bramalea in the 70s was like a new experiment. It was, subdivisions had been going in the 50s. That was sort of a post-war thing, but Bramalea was almost a bit of a social experiment, and it was very inexpensive, and it was all new Canadians. So our family was new to Canada. Everyone around us was new. Everyone spoke different languages. Our houses smelled different. The decoration, even though the outside of the houses, in a subdivision, they all kind of look the same.
Mm-hmm.
When you walked inside anyone's house, it smelled different. It looked different. It felt different. It had a whole different kind of thing going on. And that was how I started. My world looked like that. It looked like these plopped in subdivisions, but full of secrets and interesting things in behind the doors. And then when I was 12, see, I ramble a bit, but I'm sort of pulling it together. When I was 12, we moved to Oakville. And Oakville is not very far from Bramalea, but what a different world. So I had never grown up with trees. We had always had our grass show up on pallets and get rolled out on grass delivery day, essentially. And we moved to this community where everything looked the same in a different way. It was beautiful, but it was historic plaques. It was people being very fussy about the color you painted your door. It's like everything had to stay within a tradition. People liked things the way they were. And my brother and I noted not only were there big trees, which we weren't used to, the other thing we really felt was everyone looks the same. So it was a decision to be the same, to keep things as they were, that everything was so kind of, I don't know, it was almost like Pleasantville by contrast. So there was chaos in the early stages, which is what we grew up in. And then we move into this sort of Pleasantville. So in a funny way, I was thinking that this book, The House Next Door, is almost the story of my life told backwards. Because this house he likes things as they are. He has everything in its place. He knows how to operate in this world. And when the change comes, it looks a lot like my childhood. It shows up, and it's actually quite glorious. He's not ready to see that yet, but those pieces all kind of melded to make this story, which was a long process and changed many times in its iterations. But that is the background for this crazy story.
Wow. I feel like that is such a shared experience with lots of people too. I remember also, I grew up in Guelph, so I remember the first house that we lived in Guelph. We also came from a different country, and we were one of two houses on that street. And now it's like slowly there are more and more houses, and that growth is such a shared experience.
And I think people have I think anyone can say, when something new happens on your street, people kind of get up, it's like even here in Toronto, where we have a lot of sort of even diverse look of a street, when one of those new houses comes in that's contemporary and all the other houses kind of look the same, there's a bit of a suspicion like, oh, you're going to change our street, right? So we do use this. And I liked it kind of as a metaphor for society. I felt like using the houses and architecture for telling these stories about our feelings of things being the way we know them. If they're not perfect how they are, like it's funny that we want to hold on to them as they are because they're not perfect, but that we resist this idea, right? And the houses allowed me to kind of have an interior and an exterior kind of take on this change.
For sure. What was it like to write a book that was like, obviously there's a very deep, rich story to it, but then also so much of it is these beautiful illustrations of the houses. Like, how was it mixing being a crafter with an author in that sense?
Yeah, no, it's funny because they both definitely informed each other as I figured out what this story was. I'm surrounded here. I've pulled some samples of houses. So an early house I have, I'll show you, it has a little wooden roof and he has no shutters. I hadn't really thought about the shutters yet. But he has an inside. It's very much like a dollhouse.
Wow.
And I had thought about, I was playing with this idea of how would I have this interiority and this exterior? Because how do you identify with a house? A next stage was, this is an early main character. He definitely has a face. Like you can see eyes, mouth. He's kind of like stunned and goofy. But that also kind of, what's the word? I can never say that word. Anthropomorphize, where you're like making the house too human. I decided I didn't want to do that because I just didn't want to. And I also felt that it was going to complicate the story when I got into the idea of the shutters. He has eyes up here and cheeks down here. So the other thing about my craftiness is that I overbuilt the heck out of this. Like I overthought it, I overbuilt it. But each of those stages really helped me figure out how was I going to express the story using, I like a forced limitation, but then I take it deep. So I thought about the interior, and I brought up here too, like this, the inside of the house, everything would have been done in Photoshop, but it's not, nothing's done in Photoshop. Just to give you a sense of the scale, like here I am.
Oh my gosh.
There's a window that is that the house looks out of. So when I'm in the story, I'm looking through that window to the outside world, and you see it shot through that. And ridiculously, because it's not necessary, this window actually opens and closes.
Oh my gosh, how cool.
And I would build it larger so that it's to scale for the book. But again, as I built it, I started to, I'm literally in the character, figuring out what the next stage is. So those two things were happening at the same time, the building and the story. It was really altering. One was really kind of helping me decide how I'm in the house. How am I feeling? And then that helped me figure out how I wanted to play with light. And even the shutters for the house, they're like, look at the size of them, because I was shooting and I wanted to have the shadows on the shutters when they opened and closed in the window. Like I wanted it all to make sense. So I overbuilt the heck out of it. I will never, make a living doing this because I'll never be able to pump out enough books. But I had so much fun. And I think the other thing that I love about this book is how much joy I had in making it. I made the book for me. I made the book for the 8-year-old that's masquerading as a 53-year-old. So
I don't know why, but when I saw the cover of the book, I thought that at first they were just 2D houses. I didn't realize that they were so in depth. They're so creative and lovely.
Yeah, thank you. I had to, some of the houses, are multi-sided because I shot them in the end when I had the whole village. I had a lot of houses to make, but things like the house next door, the main character house, not the house next door, his shutters do open and close so that he can be used in different shots, and he can be taken from pretty much any angle, including sort of blowing off the page. So you don't see that you're right, the front is super flat. Until you open the book, you don't actually see the dimensionality of it. And the other thing I'm full of metaphors and it's a bit ridiculous, but I'm a printmaker. So I tend to work flat for most things I do. I don't have a lot of even gradation, very flat. Most people could probably do on Photoshop what I do by hand, but my brain just doesn't work that way. I wanted the houses, the world is flat. Everything that's printed is 2D, and I wanted the houses, because I'm using them as characters, to have that 3-dimensionality to separate them and give them some kind of body, as it were.
Absolutely. How lovely. So you mentioned that you have written in the past for adults as well, and nonfiction and all that. So what is special about creating for children? Why shift to children's literature?
The first book I wrote was, was tied to experience, and I think I still made it funny, even though it was a very dry topic. It was a health issue. So
okay.
I like children's books for so many reasons. First of all, I'm a highly visual person. I'm visual more than, I'm a communicator. I write, I do other writing for a living. I do write, but I'm very, very visual. And I also need to translate things in my head to 3D to really grasp them. It's just the way my brain works. I used to think it was a flaw, and now I just realize that's how I operate. A children's book allows me to layer my visual brain and my heart, maybe. The words I would say are it sort of helps things come together. And I love lots of things. I mentioned forced limitations. I love the limitation of a children's book, that limited pages, the page turn, how much space you have, all of those things, and all the kind of hoops you have to jump through in your head to solve all kinds of little problems. And then that you just sort of fold it up and it's its own little world. It's like I can hold this book and I can say, in here is this whole journey that I took, and it's between these covers and it's this little package. And I love that. I love the whole creating your own special place where the story is told, where you've given a visual journey, and it's all nicely captured. And as a low-tech person, I like it as a book, right?
Yes, so magical. So what are your hopes for the future? Like, are there any stories that you haven't explored yet?
My hopes for the future. Well, obviously, I would love to do more books. I have a couple of stories that are, again, simultaneously gestating with making, and those things are kind of coming together. So I have a couple of things that I have started that they're not ready to go out into the world, and I'm slow. So it will probably be a while before the next thing comes out, God willing, other dreams. There's a piece of me that would really like to work with a team on something. I love to play, and I always think that I wonder what would be inside me if it was bouncing off of somebody else earlier in the game, I fantasize when I watch, the Fantastic Mr. Fox or any of those. Now, those people are super meticulous, but the idea of being in part of the brainstorming team where you're all sitting around the table and deciding what color somebody's dress is going to be, or like the making of the little apron, that's like, I would love to be part of a bigger machine to see what comes out of me, because otherwise I'm very insular working in my studio, making little piles of things. It's funny. It's like such a paradox, because I like my forced limitations, but I also know that they in a funny way, they also limit my idea of what I can see for myself for the future.
I used to have a professor who used to say that writing can be very lonely. So definitely that speaks to me as well, the idea of community and writing and all of that.
Yeah, just being able to bounce stuff off, and you see what's inside you sometimes in a different way, because somebody's feeding an idea, and it's great. It's great.
Yeah, totally.
Less on the Instagram, right? More
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. If you had to give one piece of advice to somebody who wants to write a children's book, what would you say?
First, I don't know that I am really qualified to give any advice. I have done 3, and each have been such a different experience. I think my advice would be, do it because you love the idea. Don't do it because you think the market is looking for it, because I think you'll just end up making something that already exists. I think it has to come from you. I think you have to enjoy the process. It's a long process. And also, it's like, I was shocked when I got my first yes, and I couldn't believe it. I remember bursting into tears. Like, it's totally doable, I guess, is my point. I think everyone says, oh, it's so competitive, it's so hard, it's like, definitely put yourself out there, but do it from the heart, and don't do something that you think the market wants. I think that would be my only advice, because that's, I guess, how I'm trying to approach it. I want to love the whole experience.
Great advice. And I have to say, I can tell that there is a lot of heart in your book and in your houses, and you can definitely see that.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention that we haven't covered already?
I feel like I can't even tell you what we covered because it was such a whirlwind. I would say, yeah, I feel like I have so much I could like tour you through, but I would say look at the book. You know, the book is full of the houses, and I don't want to give away all the surprises. And yeah, I think that's all I have. I've had a really fun time visiting, so I thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. It was so nice to meet you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Well, to find out more about The House Next Door and get your own copy, go to houseofanansi.com. And to keep up with Claudine and all the amazing things that she does and will do, go to claudinecrangle.com. This has been today's WOTS Weekly Feature. Tune in next week for our Summer Reads Week. And for discounts and deals, check out toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca/weekly-features. And then also, before you head out today, stay tuned for a little teaser video from Biblio Video, an online space about Canadian literature for young people. From all of us at WOTS, happy reading.